I sometimes wonder if the Gospels rather oversimplify things to get a point across. I'm not sure. But at one stage it says the disciples were arguing among themselves who was the greatest. Sounds a bit like kids. Anyway, see what you make of it. It comes in chapter 9 of St. Mark's Gospel. Jesus told his disciples, "The Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men. They will put him to death. And 3 days after he has been put to death, he will rise again." But the disciples did not understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" They said nothing, because they had been arguing which of them was the greatest. So he sat down, called the 12 to him, and said, "If anyone wants to be first, he must make himself last of all, and servant of all." Then he took a little child, set him in front of them, and put his arms round him, and said to them, "Anyone who welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." So the idea of the disciples arguing which was the greatest, like a few kids, you know, my dad is bigger than your dad sort of thing, I'm better than you. Perhaps it's been glossed over, but the only thing I could think of is, having received such tremendous news, horrifying, that he was going to be crucified, because actually he put it in more detail in another part, but this is what he told them, he's going to be tortured. Just imagine one of your family came with the news that she's seen the doctor and she's got just a short time to live and he's going to be suffering great agony, and how you cope with that. One result might be that you start arguing among yourselves about something nothing to do with it. It sometimes affects us a bit like that. They were afraid to ask him when they didn't understand. I don't think they were frightened of Jesus, because by this stage they knew him quite well. But I think they might have been afraid to ask in case they looked silly in front of the others. You know, sometimes you might be in a meeting and they say, "Any questions?" And you're dying to ask a question, but everybody else seems to know the answer, so nobody asks the question. That behaving like children, you know, children do, they don't ask, they just say what they want. Later on, we don't seem so selfish, but that's really just become more subtle in the way we express it. Everything homing back to ourselves. For instance, suppose you were quite generous in giving money to some people in need. You give the money and think, aren't I good? That element comes into it, even to the extent that people collecting for charity, they may even advertise, "You will feel better." It will give you peace of mind, a lovely feeling when you've been generous like that. Quite the wrong motive, putting you in the wrong place. We think of ourselves instead of the people in need. You know, a few weeks ago, in the place where I'm living, we had a collection for the island Dominica, which had been really ravaged by a terrible storm. And I said to the accountant, before you bank the money, let me know how much it is so I can tell people. And really, it came to a larger amount than I expected. And I thought to myself, and I said to her, our parish are really very generous. She said, I hope it will do a certain amount to alleviate the terrible suffering. I'm thinking about us, how generous we are. She's thinking, quite rightly, of the people we're trying to help. But so often we try to come back to ourselves, not meaning it sometimes. It's too subtle, it gets into us without our realizing it. I noticed a few days' time, just down the road from us, they're going to have a big meeting about domestic violence. And it's a real problem in this part of the world, as it is in many places. And this meeting, and I mentioned to another priest that this meeting had been arranged, and he said, oh, we've got our own organisation in the diocese, the Catholic one, dealing with domestic violence. What's that got to do with it? Do I have to go along with that line because it's a Catholic one and by our diocese? Surely, all I should be thinking of are the people who are suffering from the domestic violence. Do what we can for them. Unfortunately, instead of concentrating on the people we're trying to help, we come back to ourselves. Do you remember a few years ago when the dictator of Romania was toppled, and we realized what a terrible state that country was in? Children in orphanages who were just starving to death, and so it was a terrible state. And so a lot of people from Britain, or a number of them, said they would go out and help. And one woman, a very capable, qualified accountant, decided she could do that. Her children had left home, her husband died. She was about 50, early 50s, really capable woman, and she said she would go and help them. So she applied to a refugee centre who arranged this sort of thing. She told me later, they were lovely people and so generous with their time, but totally disorganised. So she got caught up in helping the organisation. In the end, she decided to give years of her life to organising people to go out to help with refugees instead of going herself. Much less romantic. She would never have the lovely feeling of picking up a baby whose life she had saved and see the baby smile. What a wonderful feeling. She'd never have that. But she did more than any of the others, I think. She realized her giftedness and she put it at the service of others without any feedback. Stuck for years in a tiny office in East London. Realizing what she had been given by God and wanting to give it to others. Not thinking of what it would bring back to herself, but concentrating on that. Oh, that's so rare. So often I find I come back looking at myself. To be really humble, don't try to make yourself look small. That's not being humble. Appreciate your own giftedness and realize that it is a gift of God. All I have is a gift of God, and if I can put that at the service of others, I can't pride myself with it. I'm simply giving what has been given to me, sharing what was given to me, not mine, but the gift of God. Of course, you remember in the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, when the Pharisee is saying, well, thank God I'm not like them. If I said that, thank God I'm not like that lot, I'm not really thanking God at all. I'm just saying how good I am. But appreciate your own giftedness and say, this is a gift of God, given by God. I had no right to it. And now I can share this with others. But concentrating on the others, not on what it would bring back to myself. Be aware of your own gifts if you are to be really humble. And realize that they are gifts, not my own. But also it's important to realize how much we depend on other people. You know that man Bill Gates, the computer man, probably one of the richest men in the world. He's generous with his money. But what impressed me most was when he said, My name is given to these things, but I couldn't do it on my own. I couldn't make a computer on my own. I need the people who work with us. Some get better known than others, but we depend on each other, and he appreciated his dependence on others. We need one another simply to live. One man I only heard about recently called Comte de Saint-Simon. He lived about year 1800. I don't think he was a religious man, but believed wholeheartedly in acknowledging our dependence on one another. And people who worked in his organisation had a uniform with the buttons at the back. They couldn't even get dressed without appreciating that they need somebody else to help them. We need each other so much, and we forget it as we concentrate on what we are doing. In a small firm, some clean, some are clever with their hands, some organise it, some market it. In a home, we work together. If you have children, they need you and you need them. To be really humble as Jesus wants us to be, and to become like Christ. Acknowledge your own giftedness and how much you need other people. And then it said Jesus took a little child and set him in front of them as an example. I was wondering, whose child was it? It said he was in a house. Now we know Peter was married, but we don't know if he had any children. Anyway, the house, presumably the parents didn't mind. He took this little child and set him up. But if Jesus had the same experience as me, it's not like the holy pictures where you see them looking up and feeling comfortable in Jesus' arms. For the most part, they'll stay with me for about 30 seconds and then scream for mummy. Accept little children, not just children, and people who are childlike. Don't expect gratitude from them, but just think of what they need, just as you might need them. The subtle selfishness which gets into us. Children will argue who is the best. We don't do that. And yet deep within ourselves, turning it back to ourselves, that's the subtle serpent that gets into us. Ask for this grace to forget yourself and simply concentrate on the people who need you. It's a wonderful gift. Ask God for it. I'll use a Celtic blessing to pray for that gift. May the God of gentleness be with you, caressing you with sunlight, wind and rain. May the tenderness of God shine through you to warm the hearts of those who are lonely or sad. May the gentleness of God be yours. Amen.